Right, I'm going to start. Hi there, everyone. First of all, I'd like to welcome everyone who's just joined us today for today's webinar. The title of the webinar is Cut Through the Noise with Compelling and Creative Marketing Content. My name is Jessica Ringshaw, and I'm the Managing Director of the Branded Content Marketing Association, or the BCMA, which is the leading global member association promoting the value and effectiveness of branded content through powerful storytelling. Today's consumers are bombarded with marketing emails, SMS messages throughout their daily lives, through every possible channel. Brands need to cut through the noise with compelling content that engages rather than just interrupts audiences and leaves a lasting impression. Reuters Events and the BCMA have brought together 4 really brilliant panelists from brands who've lifted their content above the competition through the creation of thought-provoking and effective content across multiple platforms. It's exciting because this webinar is actually part of the build-up program for the Brand Marketing Summit, which is happening in June this year on the 1st and the 2nd. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the panelists first. So we've got Catherine Lamb, who's the Global Head of B2B Marketing Strategy for HSBC. We've got Francisco Cedillo, Head of Content Marketing at Verwork International and Co. Andrea Kocic, Head of Digital Transformation and E-Business Development at Nestlé. And we've also got Richard Levy joining us with 20 years brand experience in financial services. So I'll give you a little rundown of how the session's going to work today. Over the next 45 minutes to an hour, we'll be asking the panelists to reveal their own successes and challenges they face with real-life examples. I'll start by asking the contributors to tell us a little bit about themselves, their roles, and what they're doing currently. Then we're going to be taking some questions from you guys, the audience. So please have a look at the Q&A question box as part of the webinar, and feel free to submit questions at any point, and I'll make sure that I'll be fielding them through to the panelists here, which is really exciting. And then after the webinar, Reuters Events will be sending the link to the webinar out to everyone, either today or first thing tomorrow. So just to give you another kind of top line in terms of the key themes that we're going to be exploring today, master storytelling and creating content that drips with your brand's personality. We're going to look at how to measure that success for your campaigns and the metrics to look out for and spot, and how our contributors create value for their customers by producing content that addresses their needs. So without further ado, Andrew, I'm going to come to you first. It'd be great to hear a little bit about your background and your role at Nestlé currently.
Hi, Jessica. Hello, everyone, and thanks for having me. So I currently work at Nestlé in the Europe, Middle East, North Africa zone, looking after digital transformation for the infant nutrition business. So just wanted to make sure that that's a little bit more specific than the title I have on the slide. So this is a 2 billion Swiss franc business which spans from Middle East up to Russia and the Nordic region. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of diversity in terms of consumers, and also how content can best fit the purpose of our brands. So what does my role entail, and how does content fit in there? So I'm looking after the digital transformation of the category, which means how to make marketing practices more contemporary and in line with all the opportunities that digital has to offer. And given the importance of content, for instance, last year we have launched a content studio based out of one location in Lisbon with our agency partner Ogilvy Portugal, where the aim of this would be to produce content more efficiently in order to avoid replicating all the content production processes market by market, because my zone spans across something like 30 different markets. And then we also want to increase the efficiency of our content in terms of its quality, so that it better resonates with the consumers and it's more unique and really more attributable to our brands.
Fabulous.
Obvious. And then we try to define the sweet spot between what is it that we stand for, what do consumers look for, and what are the topics where we have the credibility to speak about and own these topics in our ongoing conversations with consumers.
Very good. So it's quite a broad, as you say, it's quite a large task, isn't it? Because you've got such a large kind of portfolio to manage. I'm also really keen to hear from you, you know, across with all of that data and all of that information coming through, as you say, in terms of the engagement levels from those consumers. How do you measure the effectiveness of that sort of more targeted approach through content, and what metrics do you use?
Yes. So first of all, let me just say that we have a lot of insights on how moms engage in digital, especially. So we have a need for an understanding touch point by touch point of how this engagement happens, what works well, what doesn't work well. But then we also need to tackle it from a brand perspective. So at any given time, we need to be able to say, how does brand A perform across the various markets and across the funnel? So we have developed an internal methodology where we utilize Nestlé's offshore services to collect data, sometimes in an automated way, sometimes in a manual way, but the point is to really pull it together in terms of a funnel to better understand what works well in terms of the awareness raising level, engagement, loyalty, and so on and so forth. So we have taken quite a lot of time to make this happen, but it definitely has to have the measurement both at a touch point level but also at a total brand level, because then we can really speak the same language related to performance across the organization, and this definitely helps with better understanding the performance of content and how we can improve this over the course of long-term perspective of all of this. But then ultimately it's in her hands to look for information depending on what need stage she's in along the journey once the baby is born. So one thing which we often see is that when moms have a small baby, obviously it's a lot more about solving the next crisis, give her information about what to do to get the baby to sleep. So it's really much more pragmatic, and even the pace and the type of content that we need to produce is very different along the stages.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, super. Thank you so much, Andrea. I'm going to just move on to one of our other panelists, just so I get them to introduce themselves, and we'll come back to you hopefully when we've got some questions shooting in from our audience. So Francisco, you've actually not been in the head of content role of our work for a very long time. It'd be great for our listeners to hear your remit and what you've been tackling over the last period that you've been there.
Thank you. Yes, that's correct. I've been in this position not longer than, let's say, 8 months, I believe, including this transition period of a company reorganization in the marketing area. And I really like the introduction from Andrea, and I feel like, well, most of what she said, I could just repeat basically, because this is also my daily challenge. I mean, this search for the ideal way to engage with our customers through content, right? I'm taking care now of the content marketing for 2 divisions, the culinary one, which is based around the Thermomix cooking appliance, and then the cleaning one, which is around our system of vacuum cleaners. And they both have their peculiarities, but what they have in common is the essence of the company, a Forward Group, which is the direct selling approach. So you will not find these appliances mostly in retail or in traditional retail channels. Rather, we have this direct selling model, so through our independent sales advisors. And that makes it a very interesting, peculiar challenge to connect both with our advisors, right, to have the right content for them, to our sales advisors, and also for our customers. So in the last months, we've been analyzing how to do this, setting up the right team and the right organization also with the countries, with our markets, because we also take care of this globally. So this carries around 15 markets of our own, plus the huge distribution business through third-party companies.
And so you're saying you're building that team. I'm actually really interested to find out how you are looking to kind of restructure that team and what you feel you need in that space.
Absolutely. So we've identified that the content marketing area has the best, let's say, the best overview and outlook into our holistic marketing activities. So we've defined it that this is the area that owns the global marketing plan. Whether we have specialized areas into branding, into customer and to advisor, into digital marketing and performance, this is the area that owns the plan. So one of the key positions within the team is what we call the managing editor, the person who is responsible for creating, aligning with everybody, all the stakeholders, the marketing calendar. So both at the headquarter and the markets. And the rest are what we're calling creative editors. So these are people who are organizing the work and really doing the daily work with our agencies and contributors to produce this meaningful content.
Mm. And actually, you've created a really powerful brand platform using your content, haven't you, by hosting recipes and kind of digging further down into what your consumers are really, looking for outside of, the core products that you're selling. And you've done some really interesting partnerships. Can you explain to the listeners a little bit about that process?
Absolutely. So that goes more into the Thermomix side, the culinary side. We have this platform we call Cookie-Do, which is our recipe platform. And all the recipes you can find there are specifically designed for Thermomix. So there are not traditional recipes that you would do on a pan or an oven, but rather specifically designed for Thermomix. And we have really a huge company asset there, because I feel like recipes are a luxury. These are the ultimate engagement assets that we have. The recipes are really driving passion and engagement with customers and advisors. You can have long discussions and really passionate arguments about what the best recipe is and how to improve it. So we have a really a fortune to have that platform owned by ourselves. And then this used to be just like a free content recipes, but we managed to transform it into a paid service, which has been a huge challenge. Customers are mostly used to finding recipes for free. Nobody's used to paying for recipes when they're in digital form, but we've managed to turn it into a business. But other than the revenue, I personally believe that the engagement that this drives is the highest asset, so the most valuable asset.
Yeah, it's really powerful. And in terms of the development of that platform ongoing, I mean, obviously you've got such a rich space to be able to pull data and, as you say, engagement and feedback. Is that also informing, R&D and product design? Is that sort of, is the content actually, driving change in the business in a different way?
It is, absolutely. So all the information we generate on this platform feeds into many different streams. So the marketing stream, of course, for us, one thing that we've done is that this platform used to have only recipe content before. Now you can have a rich stream of editorial content and tips and tricks and many different categories, not just cooking, but also lifestyle. And this is something we gained from just observing customers and feedback. So this is on our side, but it also feeds into, of course, the other technical areas like the UX design for the same platform, like the product features, like the new cooking modes for the appliance. All this we gain from observing the customers on the platform.
Amazing. And also, in order to make that platform very rich, I know that you've worked with existing publishers, for example. Have you found that, those sort of that partnership model in order to generate your content useful?
We have found it useful in the past, although we're still exploring it. At the moment, we don't have really big partnerships going on. We've tested in the past with other publishers that are in the category of food and cooking to a certain success, but I would say that the Thermomix approach is always very specific. It's not easy to take traditional recipes and put them into the Thermomix world, let me say it like this, and this is always a challenge to train and to create a new workflow that works for both companies. So we're just still testing this, and we still don't have a proper solution as to how to drive the value of our brand through leveraging on others' brands, I would say.
But it does make the future very bright, doesn't it? Being able to look at that. You've got a commercial model sitting outside of the product base, which is very exciting.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Francisco. I will come back to you shortly. I'll move on to Catherine. Catherine, I obviously introduced you a little bit earlier, but it'd be great for you to give the listeners an idea of how you work at HSBC and what you're responsible there from a strategic perspective.
Great. Yes, thank you. Hi. Yeah, I'm Catherine. I look after B2B marketing strategy at HSBC. So what that means is that with my team, I'm responsible for really understanding the customer, what their needs are and what they're looking for from a financial services provider, and then kind of interpret the business strategy into marketing strategy, sort of set the direction and the overall kind of plan for our markets and regions to follow. So one of the key themes that, well, I should perhaps mention, maybe explain for people who our customers are first. So obviously that's businesses of all types and sizes. So small businesses starting from kind of 3 million revenue upwards, right through to sort of large corporates and multinationals, your sort of BP Shells of the world, and then other financial institutions as well. Within that kind of top end, and their needs and challenges can be very, very different. So a small business, for instance, who's still perhaps trying to establish themselves and growing very fast, the type of needs that they have from a bank are very kind of different. The number one reason that most small businesses fail, unfortunately, is really just to do with cash flow. It's not necessarily the fact that they're not winning business or being successful in their own marketplace. It's to do with not getting money in fast enough for the work that they're doing to be able to then pay suppliers and other demands that they have. That's one of the biggest reasons small businesses go bust, essentially, which is obviously something that we can help them with. But large corporates don't tend to be sort of lying awake at night worrying about making payroll happily, but they have other problems or other challenges. So they tend to be perhaps more concerned about their suppliers, managing that demand, making sure that their cash is used really efficiently, that their investments are helping them, that they're hedging their foreign currency risk, those sorts of things. So our challenge then in terms of how we engage with those audiences and the content that we're providing or offering them needs to be really, really targeted. And we've spent a lot of time really trying to understand the different needs of the business audience, both by size and by type of business, so by sector, by region. And really listen and understand what, in the customer's language, what does that mean for them, and how, what are the pain points, what's the information that they're searching for and looking for. And we've actually discovered that there's a lot more consistency in that than you might expect. And we've been able to map those core needs to our products and our services. But what we lead with in terms of the content that we create is very much the customer need and either the problem or the challenge that they're facing. And that's enabled us then to put together a targeting approach which segments those audiences down to a really fine degree, so that you might lead with one topic, say around supply chain, but you in terms of, we'd look at sort of almost hundreds of pieces of content within that are personalized and targeted for different types of business within that. And then test and learn as we go to understand what's engaging and what's working best for those businesses.
That's really interesting when you're talking about, testing and learning. What do you think? What are the biggest learnings you've had from that process and using that sort of micro targeting technique?
So we use all the traditional kind of measurements to understand whether people are engaging or kind of how long their dwell time and if they're sharing, etc. I think what we've learned is that the most effective pieces really trigger a new thought or an action or a behavioral change for the customer. When you can see that you're nudging them forward in their own thinking, that they're actually changing their mind about something, or you're sparking a new idea so that they go on to read something in deeper sort of evaluation, or they're asking to hear more about something. That's what we're really kind of looking for. It's that evidence of a change in mindset, or kind of leading them to be nudged down into taking action.
So that, really, I mean, everybody's talked about the sort of need to really understand your audience and really understand your customer. But that data is incredibly important to you, isn't it? That's what's driving a lot of the content strategy.
Yeah, data, and I wouldn't pretend that we're the experts here, but yes, data is hugely important, and I think it's increasingly a skill set that marketers are going to have in their toolkit, to be honest, balancing that kind of creative and sort of scientific approach. It's really about how do you use the data to understand your audience. First of all, to be able to segment and personalize to the greatest degree that you can, and then store and manage that information. So you're building profiles of different types of customers and learning over time and building up your picture of that audience and adding to it constantly, so that you don't sort of sit still, but continue to learn and add to your picture with the data that's coming in.
Yeah, that's right, and be able to react to it, and as you say, kind of start carving a different path in order to continue that engagement. Thank you, Catherine. That's a brilliant breakdown. Again, I'll come back to you shortly. I'm just going to move on to our last but not by no means least panelist, Richard Levy. So you've also worked in the financial services for a long time at several large brands. It'd be great for you to give the listeners a sense of your background and where your expertise lie.
Yeah, no problem. Good morning, Jess, and good morning, everyone listening. I've spent 20 years in marketing across financial services. I started off at Santander in the marketing graduate scheme many years ago, and then moved to First National Bank, which gave me exposure to point of sale finance. I moved then on to GE Money in their consumer lending business, and I've spent the last 10 years in my final role to date at MoneyGram, which is a remittance company. And that took me into payments, which is a fascinating space and a very topical one right now. I initially looked after the United Kingdom and eventually progressed up to head up Europe. And as I say, I mean, it's a very interesting time in the payment space. It's becoming digitalized very much and transforming the way that money is sent across the world. So it was a great place to be. And I finished with MoneyGram at the end of last year.
Okay, great. So as you say, you've had a lot of experience in this space. And I know that there's something that you and I had discussed previously was the question for in content, quality over quantity. Being able to develop content that's of real value. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and a lot of what Catherine has said, I would certainly sort of replicate, really. I mean, I think one of the things that people need to be aware of when they're looking at content from a company point of view is that we live and breathe our brands for 40, 50 hours a week. And actually, consumers who we're effectively targeting have probably better things to do and are busy living their lives. So the golden rule in respect of content is to make it useful and add something to the consumer's life, really. And I think that starts, Jess, by thinking about it from the customer point of view rather than the company point of view. What would be useful? What would add to the customer? What would enhance their understanding of the products or the world generally? And in other words, be very, very market orientated. Because when you think of how much content is out there and how much, I mean, you alluded to it in your introduction, how much you're being bombarded with stuff on a daily basis, then if you want to stand out from a content point of view, that relevancy and the additional information it gives to the customer is going to be key. So my advice to any company really looking at a content strategy would be to start with what's the purpose of it? What are you actually trying to achieve and why are you doing it? And it may well be harder to measure, and I think the other panelists have made that point. And in a world where everything seems to be very matrix driven and what's the return and what are you getting for it, I think content plays that umbrella role that it reaches different touch points. So it's just very clear that customers need to be, companies rather, need to be very clear what they're trying to get out of it before you embark on a content strategy. So some examples, probably just that I've come across recently from a financial services point of view, is we've just come out of the Christmas period. I was listening to a report the other day where it said a third of people in the United Kingdom fund Christmas on credit, whether that be credit cards or overdrafts or loans. And I think brands then have an opportunity to provide useful guidance as to the best way to fund events such as Christmases to avoid people getting into debt, quite frankly. And if content can give that experience and say, well, if you save throughout the year or you try and cut back in this way or that way, then I think it's really adding to customers' lives during a really expensive time of year. If you're in the currency exchange business, and companies like TransferWise, for example, do this very well, then I think you can give advice on the best places to travel to, what to see and where to go. And also on exchange volatility, we're seeing an enormous amount of currency exchange up and down, certainly since Brexit, for example, where the pound weakened considerably. And if brands can come out and give guidance as to what they think may happen, how to play it, what the advantages are of a weak pound, what the advantages are of a strong pound, etc., then it just gives consumers, whether that be businesses, whether it's a business-to-business market or business-to-consumer market, it just gives people added information that they may not know. And in the remittance market that I've just come out of, people are moving around the world, increasingly settling into new countries. And if you can make your content about advice and help, how to settle into a new country, how to set up a bank account, for example, where to go, employment, schools, all this kind of stuff that people living in countries probably take for granted. But it's very challenging if you're new there. Then again, I think it's an advantage to it's content that, to go right back to the beginning, is very market orientated and very useful to the consumer. And none of the examples I've given are overtly sales led, but provide wider content to the brand, which is, I guess, what we're trying to do. And I think just overall in financial services, the theme of what I'm saying is making money easier to understand, be seen as the expert, be seen as the place to go to if people want information. I think money generally can be perceived as relatively dull, but it's important for people to really understand the wider picture, and content can be the authority. So 3 takeaways for me. I think from a company perspective, ask why you're doing it as much as what you want to get out of it. Big question is, what is the customer going to gain out of it? There is too much content out there, so make it valuable, and don't make it overtly sales-led. Think of it like a YouTube video. The most successful ones, the ones talking about an area of expertise, make it clear you're the brand behind it, of course, and if people find it useful, I think they'll naturally come and seek you out.
Yeah, you'll engage them and feel very useful to that audience. Brilliant, thank you, Richard. That was really really concise and really clear. I've actually got a question that I think you can answer, Richard, but I'd also like to hear from Catherine as well. So we've had a question. With an industry like financial services and B2B banking, what issues do you face when trying to personalize marketing, especially around data protection? Perhaps Catherine, you can answer first, and Richard, if you could follow up.
Sure.
Yeah, well, you definitely need to be aware of the kind of data privacy issues. So we've put a lot of work into permission settings, for instance, and that's obviously kind of a key place to start. It's easier, obviously, with your own customers versus perhaps the market at large. So getting those permissions in place with your own customer base at the same point that they sign up with you. So as they open an account, just trying to explain, I'm sure, we've all had the opportunity when you buy something to kind of click, are you willing to, be sent marketing kind of materials, and you kind of maybe automatically go no. It's educating the relationship manager or whoever's talking to the customer at that time that this isn't just, it won't be spam, it won't be they won't be bombarded with things, it will be tailored and useful to them, so that right at that first point of the relationship, they're willing to to receive things that might be insights or research on their sector, about their peer group, about their about their own competitors even. So definitely not just make it very clear that they're not just going to get bombarded with irrelevant stuff. And then if it's not your customers, so it's not kind of named, it is about, as I think Richard was saying, being clear, sending the right things to the right people and wherever possible at the right time. So, that's where the kind of hyper targeting comes in, or where, as far as you can, that, you are sending content that's relevant to people who are searching for that content and are interested in it, and they've been looking at that moment. I think that's the key place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got hundreds of questions firing in, actually. So, Richard, I'm just gonna move on to the next question, if that's okay.
Sure.
Andrea, I think this one's going to be for you. So, what is the percentage of digital marketing within overall marketing budget? I'm sure it sort of changes, but it'd be good to hear from you on your perspective on this.
That's a brilliant question. I'm not sure I can reveal a specific percentage, but we definitely have a KPI on this organization-wide, which is an interesting thing, because do you really want to measure the percentage of spend dedicated to digital, and is this really talking about performance? So we've also discussed internally that while we do want to make sure to keep an eye on the level of spend in digital, we actually better want to understand whether this budget is spent in a way that is really linked to performance. So we have additional KPIs, such as how we split the money between working media and non-working media. And that to me is much more relevant, because especially in digital and with so many touch points that we have to operate, we tend to put a lot of emphasis on developing assets, and we definitely need to keep the markets engaged in putting the right media effort behind it, also for those messages to be broadcast to the audience in a scaled out way. So, like I said, of course, we track the spend dedicated to digital. We also look at the spend between working and non-working media. And recently, we started to also introduce a notion of how we perform against the competition. And competition can be two things. In our case, it could be our direct competitor. And actually, in our zone, we are, although we created the category a little bit over 150 years ago, we are not the category leader, so we are a challenger. So it's fairly obvious that we need to benchmark ourselves against our main competitor. But then speaking about content, it's also interesting to see who is really the competition out there, because especially if you take it from the angle of search or social media, you can think of, is an editorial platform a competitor? Or are influencers your competitors, because they have the dedication from consumers and they have the interaction from consumers. So when we look at it from a content perspective, we also need to see whom to benchmark ourselves against, because it also needs to be broader than our direct competitor. It needs to be really whoever has the best performing content out there. I hope it answers the question.
Yeah, no, that was a fabulous answer. Thank you. I've got another question. I'm going to open this up to everyone. It would be great, fight for you to get in there first. Could you elaborate further on what tools and strategies you use to actually figure out what content the target market is interested in? Is it trial and error, keyword searches, etc., etc.? I don't know who would like to jump on this one. Perhaps maybe this is back to you, Catherine, I think, in terms of your sort of targeting.
Yeah, so I think I'd go back to trying to have some understanding first of what customers are using before you even start putting things out. So if you really understand what the needs are of your customer base, and you've done some work to understand how that differs between your different segments that you're trying to reach, you know, mapping that perhaps to your products and services ultimately, but you know, but then just do perhaps a pilot. So that's often the way that we start, with something small. We'll take one segment, one market, you know, do some A/B testing with some high-level content, see what people engage with best. Try different levels of detail. So, you know, do they prefer perhaps a little snapshot view, or actually, if they're really interested in it, you know, are they looking? They really want a full report? Is video or kind of a human being kind of walking them through the story of it? Does that work better? And obviously kind of see across different channels how people arrive at the content, whether something like that is working first. So get out. I think encourage you to pilot and get out fairly fast to test and learn before you try and perfect things. Don't kind of get the whole campaign kind of all in some beautiful kind of box with a bow. Get out and test and learn as fast as you can.
That's great advice. Thank you, Catherine. Francisco, I have one for you. Could you throw light on how do you build a brand personality to a consumer durable products like kitchenware?
Sure, absolutely. That's a great question. And this is something we work on also, like constantly, to refresh it, to make sure that we're on the right path. But I think I would say it's kind of like the traditional way, what you would imagine. What we do is we have our, let's say, our brand house, where we define the hierarchy and relation between our different brands. Fabric is a brand that works as an endorser of our product brands like Thermomix and Cobalt. So Fabric is the endorser, and each of this brand has their own personality and essence, right? Then what we do is we do an exercise of strategic messaging, where we break down this brand essence into, let's say, core messages or key value messages. So what is this essence actually about when we bring it down to a more practical level? Still kind of theoretical, this strategic messaging, but what gives it a lot of value is that at this moment we start crossing it with our customer personas. So at this stage we start thinking about different personas targets. How would this message play particularly to this target? So we decline it a little bit more, make it more specific. And then the next exercise is much more on the ground, which is our content mapping, where we take this strategic messaging exercise and then really decline it into actual stories, where we say, okay, our outlaw archetype persona really is looking for this particular content in Cobalt when we're talking about the season of spring cleaning, for example. So we have these three levels, coming down from the brand essence, down to the strategic message, down to the content mapping. And when we do this consistently, and this is what we're achieving now, doing this consistently really builds a brand story over time.
So it's very much looking at the long-term view, isn't it? It's making sure that you're kind of constantly, you know, working to climb to the top of the mountain, and not just being sporadic about your approach.
I think so, yes.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Francisco. So I now have a question from South Africa, which is exciting. I'd just like to ask, what type of communications do the experts find are working the best? Are people moving away from email, more to social media, or is it still very much industry dependent?
Maybe I can try and take this one.
Yeah, go for it.
So I think we cannot really generalize this way. I think that depending on the industry you're in and depending on your brand's communication task, you need to look at what does the receptivity mean for that specific issue you're trying to solve. Because let me take an example. In a completely different category at Nestle, we tested some corporate sustainability related messages on Facebook quite a few years ago. And I think that the content itself was very great, very good, and the message was really important, yet it didn't really resonate. And then what can you learn from this? Can you say Facebook doesn't work for our category, or can you say people are not interested in sustainability? Of course not. It's really all about, was that the right touch point for that particular message? Because keeping in mind that, for instance, people don't go to Facebook to spend time and have a deep thought. It's really just to have quick engagement, something fun, and moving on. So you can use Facebook maybe for awareness building aspects, but it's not a platform where you will develop deep loyalty, just as an example. Same goes, for instance, for newsletters. In our category, since we're in infant nutrition, it works really, really well, interestingly, because it really allows us to target content based on the specific need state of the mom. Because the experience is very different when a mom is maybe 14 weeks pregnant versus when she has a 14-week-old baby. So it allows us as a touch point to really tell her a story which is relevant to where she is at that specific moment in time. So it's all about what's the receptivity from your customer and whether that touch point is the right one to allow for that receptivity to work well for the brand message that you want to bring across.
Right, that was very concise. Thank you. Does anybody else want to chip in on that question, or shall I move on?
Yeah, I'd echo. I think that's really right. It is difficult to generalize, and I think at the top of the funnel, you need to be as wide as possible, really, and really broad. But obviously, then you're trying to kind of narrow down. And for us, we're trying to get people onto our own site. Because we can track the data much more efficiently there and bring them into a kind of one-to-one conversation. But at the top of the funnel, as you're reaching out, you want to be pretty broad-minded.
Absolutely. Catherine, whilst I've got you all warmed up, I've got another question for you. My question is to Catherine. She said one should have a segmented approach, but how would you cut through the clutter if the same segments have been targeted by many competitors?
Yeah, well, yeah, it is a very busy marketplace. I think you have to do your research, do as much insight gathering as you can before you start going out there, because you don't want to just contribute to that noise. If you've got a message and somebody mentions sustainability, for instance, if perhaps that's something that you're taking out there, then what are you saying that is different from other people, and how is that mapping to something that's really useful for the customer? Are you just putting something out that's kind of adding to the general sort of discussion and conversation, or is what you're putting out really going to be usable? And if so, who's the specific audience that it's going to be usable to, and can you isolate that group and then just send it to them, so that, because otherwise everybody else is just kind of for them it will be the kind of noise factor. So I think it's watching what's out in the marketplace, and really understanding for your segments what's going to make the difference for them, and how will they use it? How will they use the content that you're offering?
And it goes back to a kind of, as you say, sort of as Richard was talking about earlier, kind of being able to be useful as well to that customer base. I have, again, a kind of broad question here. So jump in from anyone who's got a first response. What challenges do you experience as marketers with technology teams? So whether or not that's partners or partners that you're working with, if there are any challenges, of course.
Yeah, I can jump on that one. Just I think, well, I would say it would be the traditional challenge, which is prioritizing. For us, that's the main thing. You have a design team who's a UX design team who's focused on optimizing the experience for the user. And sometimes we have different inputs for what that means for the user, right? We have certain strategic goals on marketing that we want to reach, and then we can have different ideas of how to do it better. So for us, that's the everyday conversation is if we're focusing on the right thing, or if we're getting the right inputs from the market to actually develop features or functions or what to bring faster to the market.
Yeah. Right, I think I've got another question. Thank you, Francisco. I've got another question, and Richard, I'd like you to give me an answer for this one. The emergence of purpose-driven content is a key trend. Do you think it's something that's going to be set foot to continue in 2020?
Yeah, I think purpose-driven content is a key trend, and I think purpose generally seems to be the certainly was the big debate of 2019. My own view on the purpose content or companies coming up with a very purpose-driven mission statement is that it's fine as long as it's not manufactured. And I think customers can see through something that's not authentic. And, there were examples in the last 4 or 5 years. Pepsi, for example, comes to mind when they did their ad that eventually they had to pull. Because it just didn't go down very well. Other examples, I'm trying to think of Gillette, for example, came out with a very well-intended advert about the sort of quality and the way men need to behave, which is fine, but then it was found out they were charging 25% more for their razors for women, for example. So I think people just need to be very careful, companies need to be very careful if they're purpose-driven in their content, that there is an originality to it that goes right through the whole business. And the companies that probably make it work, in my opinion, Patagonia, for example, a business formed on a degree of purpose, can absolutely go out with purpose-driven content because it is authentic and it runs through the business. The same with the Body Shop, for example, with Anissa Ruddock, when she founded it, what was the purpose of the business? In financial services, a company I think that gets it right, Vitality Insurance. It's a pretty commoditized market. It's insurance. It's not the most sort of sexy products out there, but they've actually made it about insurance, well-being. You get money off if you go to the gym regularly. Their brand ambassadors are very good with people like Jessica Ennis, for example. So I think it can be done, but the absolute key to the purpose content is it has to be authentic. I think if it's not, and it's manufactured and it's top-down rather than bottom-up, customers will see through it. And once they see through it, I think it's a thankless task. So do it, but do it if you can be entirely authentic about it.
Absolutely, authenticity is 100% the key there. I think you're absolutely right. Okay, I have a question about another question about segmentation. So, does your segmentation of your user base clearly cover each user and each buyer in each buyer journey, and where does one start with automation? Anybody keen to jump on that one?
Yeah, so I can throw some thoughts in. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, so well, certainly from a B2B perspective, thank you. Yeah, individual buyers are critical in a B2B world. So yes, we're very hot on, what's the experience and the journey for the chief financial officer, for instance, versus perhaps the head of procurement or the head of IT or other people who might be influencers. Or if it's an owner-managed business, what's the route, what's the journey that they're on versus, say, a finance director of a large corporate. Those are very, very different kind of experiences and journeys. and we would look not just at what's their behaviour online and what are their overall kind of needs, as I said before, but we'd look also at our customer experience data and our everything around about how they use our products to understand how they engage and feed some of that in wherever relevant. So anything you can do to really kind of personalize around the individual, and then understand not just the main buyer, but who's influencing that buyer as well, because it's not usually a single decision, and you want to be able to surround the buyer as much as possible to influence the whole circle.
Great, thank you, Catherine. Andrea, I know you were going to jump on this one as well.
Yeah, so just wanted to add that given that we have multiple brands for the same life stage of the baby, we definitely have a segmentation to better understand the specifics of a target audience and how the brand is relevant to them and how the brand provides a solution to this specific audience. But then we also look at it from the perspective of the brand funnel. So where the audience might be in terms of consideration or purchase of a specific brand. So there's several ways of looking at it. And then when it comes to automation, I think that the opportunity is in the fact of better understanding what signals and what kind of data points we need in order to better understand where the consumer fits, either in the brand segmentation or in terms of the engagement funnel with a specific brand. And I think that this is a really great opportunity for improving marketing in the future, for sure.
Yeah. Brilliant, thank you, Andrea. Right, I've got questions to end on, and it's a big question, and I'd really love everybody to chip in on this, because I think this is an ongoing debate and question from across the industry. How do you see big data impact on the creative process, especially when strategizing campaigns? I think we all understand that the more understanding we have about our audiences and that data and pulling all of this information together, but also telling compelling stories, building a really engaging world for customers to be part of, is also still a process that's very much a creative one. And so it'd be great to hear from each of you. If you can give me a little top line, that would be great to finish on. Francisco, let's start.
You go.
Sure, I can go.
One of us should go. All I was going to say, Jess, is Richard, in answer to that question, is that I think we have more data now than we've ever had before. So ask, I think, the question of what it is from the data you want to get. What insight-driven question do you need answered from that data? Take that answer as much as you can. Ensure it's representative, so it actually reflects the market or the segment or the people you want to go after. Understand what the need is, and that should then drive the creative process, because I think creativity is great, but it can't be creative for the sake of it. It needs to answer the question that's being posed by the customer or solve the problem. So if you can understand that from the data, then the creative should answer the question that's being posed.
Great. Very, very concise. Thank you, Richard.
Sure.
Maybe just to build on that, Richard is absolutely right about answering a problem or a need. But I think one of the other important roles of the creative is to get an emotional response. And to really engage at a human level, and that's just as important in B2B or the B2C world as well. Where big data can then be really, really helpful is in spotting and understanding where some of those emotional triggers might be. Now, you need to ask the right question to be able to find those emotional triggers. But if you have enough data and you're asking a good question, you will be able to find it over the long term. And I think the role of the creative is really critical in engaging and getting that emotional response, because it'll be a much deeper and longer lasting response if so.
Yeah, absolutely.
I couldn't agree more. Absolutely. I think, like I've said before, we have two different brands with two different personalities. One is much more emotional, like cooking side is much more emotional than the cleaning side. However, we have very clear that our creative has to be very powerful to trigger the engagement with the customer. In cleaning, we talk much more about features. We talk much more about health concerns. But in the end, our imagery reflects all the lifestyle that we want to, in the end, communicate the lifestyle that our customers would like to achieve. So we focus much more on that visually rather than the need or the benefit. So the creative, I agree, is absolutely essential.
Great, thank you, Francisco. Andrea, it'd be great to finish with you on this one.
No, definitely, I agree with what has been said before, and I think really the challenge will be how to balance providing an immediate answer in its simplest form versus still bringing in the emotion and the creativity to make a difference as a brand. So that's going to be a very nice challenge going forward for all the brands.
Absolutely, brilliant. Well, look, that's it. Thank you so much to our panelists. It's been fascinating to hear from all of you, and I really think that we've all learned a huge amount. Again, just to let all of the listeners know, Reuters Events will be sending this recording of the webinar on to you all, hopefully either today or first thing tomorrow. And I'm so glad that you joined, and we had a really great discussion, and I hope to have you all join us for the next session. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care. Have a good day.